Earlier this year, I started a brand new series on the channel called The Wrestling Degenerates, and since then, it's gone on to become one of my most popular series, all thanks to you guys. So today, I've decided to put every single Wrestling Degenerates episode all into one video to make a long movie out of it for all you guys to watch. We've got 15 wrestlers to discuss, so sit back, enjoy, like and subscribe, and Merry Christmas everyone. Let's get into it. Professional wrestling is a business full of egos, backstage politics, and at times, utter degeneracy. The world of meaty men slapping each other exists to tell stories, get positive messages across. Moments like Daniel Bryan winning at WrestleMania, Punk in Chicago, Eddie beating Brock. But the thing is, those are characters. And playing those characters are real people, and sometimes the people playing these wrestlers and characters that we see on our TV screens' true colours are shown. In today's video, we're going to go over 3 wrestlers who have gained distinct reputations within the wrestling world for various reasons. Obviously, there are a lot more than 3 degenerate wrestlers out there to talk about, so if you want to see another video like this, like the video and subscribe right this second. Okay now, let's begin. Sexy Star is a Mexican women's wrestler who has been an active wrestler since 2006. For just under the first decade of her career, Sexy Star would only ever really wrestle in Mexico, wrestling mainly for AAA, the top promotion in Mexico, where she would become one of their most successful women stars in the history of the company. But in 2014, Lucha Underground would launch, a wrestling show that was portrayed as an episodic and lineal drama taking place in an underground Lucha Libre league. The show was filmed in Los Angeles, California and aired on the El Rey network across all the states. With that came the hiring of many Mexican wrestlers, including Sexy Star, who would get her first exposure to an American audience, and Sexy Star was a quick hit in Lucha Underground. Lucha Underground allowed intergender wrestling, and this worked to Sexy Star's advantage, and she quickly became one of Lucha Underground's most popular wrestlers. Sexy Star reached her peak in Lucha Underground on Season 3's Aztec Warfare match, where she defeated 19 other wrestlers in a rumble to win the Lucha Underground Championship, the top prize in the company. And while she would lose the title on the next episode, the fact she won it in the first place showed that she was a big enough star to be put in that position. But what happened next? Where was she like a year from this point after winning the world title? Surely this is just the start for Sexy Star now. She was blacklisted from wrestling. A year from this point, she was blacklisted from wrestling. After winning the title and hitting the peak of her career, she was blacklisted. So how did this happen? Ah yes, the Rosemary incident. On July 16th, 2017, Sexy Star made a surprising return to AAA, winning their women's title. She'd been away for a while whilst working Lucha Underground, and her first defense would take place at the following month's Triple Mania event, which is AAA's biggest event of the year. She would defend the title in a 4-way match against Hamada, Lady Shani, and Rosemary. In this match, she would retain the title after making Rosemary tap out to an armbar, and then she wouldn't let go of the armbar. The bell is ringing, and she still hasn't let go of the armbar, and eventually she does let go, but we all know what we just watched. We just witnessed Sexy Star lock in a real life armbar on Rosemary and refuse to let go. The wrestling world was set ablaze by this moment, and Sexy Star was effectively blacklisted from wrestling almost immediately, with wrestlers taking to Twitter to criticize her, most notably Cody Rhodes, who was seemingly working every single wrestling company at that time, stating that he will never share a locker room with Sexy Star. Since then, Sexy Star has never wrestled for a major company again. She never reappeared for Lucha Underground, and her name has now been given to a different wrestler in AAA who is now going under Sexy Star. The Hart family is one of the greatest, if not the greatest and most successful wrestling dynasties of all time. Bret Hart, Jim the Anvil, the British Bulldog, Natalya, and of course, Teddy Hart. Teddy Hart is the outcast of the Hart family, and for reasons I'm about to explain, hopefully you'll be able to understand why. After graduating the Hart Dungeon in 1998, Teddy Hart became the youngest wrestler to ever be signed to a WWF developmental contract at just 18 years old. He was sent to go train with Dory Funk Jr., however after 4 years he was cut loose, never making a major appearance for the company. He was released for what was perceived to be attitude problems, and this was about to become a very common theme in his career. Despite being released from WWE, Teddy Hart's career was far from over. In 2003, he would begin making appearances for Ring of Honor and TNA. However, he was gone from these companies even quicker than he was gone from the WWE. On November 1st, 2003, Hart competed in a scramble match at a Ring of Honor event in Elizabeth, New Jersey. After losing the match, he then began just doing flips and moonsaults off the top of the cage onto the other wrestlers. Over and over again. He just kept climbing the cage and jumping onto the other wrestlers. It was a mad thing to watch. He did it so many times to the point he ended up throwing up at ringside, and his actions annoyed the other wrestlers as he was not meant to be in the match, and having to just constantly catch this guy who keeps jumping off the cage without anyone's permission is kind of just annoying, just being a complete delinquent. After this, Teddy Hart would only wrestle 2 more matches with Ring of Honor ever, once in 2004 and a 1-match return in 2009. And it was also because of this moment that Teddy would not last much longer in TNA. He would only wrestle a couple matches for TNA before, get this, getting into an altercation with CM Punk. Some things never change. The altercation came about due to his actions at the Elizabeth show, meaning in just the first 4 years of his career, Teddy Hart has already been blacklisted from the top 3 promotions in the country. For the next few years, Teddy Hart would be hired and fired by Jersey All Pro Wrestling, AAA. He would make a sensational return to the WWE, where he'd unfortunately get released before making it to the main roster, but seemingly not for disciplinary issues this time round, so fair enough. And he would also appear in Wrestling Society X, which is perhaps the biggest promotion that he had a proper run with and was never technically fired from. The show was cancelled, he was never released for attitude problems. That and MLW. He returned to MLW in 2017, where he was middleweight champion and part of the New Hart Foundation with Davey Boy Smith Jr. and Brian Pillman Jr. However, he was released from the company in 2019 for, yep, you guessed it, disciplinary issues. Since then, Teddy Hart has not been active much in wrestling, having not wrestled since 2020. That's his wrestling career, but we haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg with Teddy Hart. We still have all of his legal issues to cover. Before we go any further though, we are going to give a quick content warning to say we're about to be discussing topics such as sexual assault and abuse. You can use the timestamps to skip forward past this part if you do wish. On December 3rd, 2014, Hart was announced as wanted by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police on sexual assault charges, including 2 women, a case that was dropped in June of 2016. In January 2017, he was arrested for a DUI, evading arrest, and auto theft. These charges were dropped later. In February 2020, he was arrested in Virginia on drug possession, and then a month later, he was arrested in Virginia for violating his bail conditions. That same month, he was arrested in Virginia for a 3rd time after allegedly assaulting his wrestler and girlfriend at the time, Maria Manick, assaulting her at the home of wrestler Ace Montana, who called the police, with Montana claiming he had to point a gun at Hart to get him away from Manick. It was this story that finally drove Hart out of wrestling. He has only wrestled 1 event since this, that being a Juggalo Championship Wrestling event in December 2020, but nothing other than that. He has effectively been blacklisted. And yes, in case you're wondering, he did have more legal troubles. In October 2020, he was charged with injuring a disabled person, evading arrest, and drug possession. And he was arrested for these exact same charges in March 2021 once again, in, you guessed it, Virginia. Joey Ryan began wrestling across the Southern California scene in the year 2000. It was very early days for his career and he would only wrestle for small indies in his first few years. He would have found his footing though when he would help to co-found Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, a Southern Californian wrestling promotion which would go on to become the premier indie wrestling company in America. And while Joey would have fair success in PWG, being a former world champion, Battle of Los Angeles winner, and also having other stints in other larger wrestling companies such as Ring of Honor and TNA many years later, Joey Ryan's career was fairly stagnant after more than a decade of wrestling, and he still hadn't got his big break, and at this point in his career, it was maybe too late. So the next best thing Joey could really do is reinvent himself and revive his stagnant career on the independent scene, and it was then that Joey Ryan would undergo a major change in his character and becoming one of the most polarizing figures in all of wrestling. In 2015, Joey Ryan traveled to Japan to wrestle for DDT, a promotion that has a large focus on comedy wrestling and just being generally silly. During Joey's match, there was a moment where he used his private area to suplex and overpower his opponent. This moment would go viral and would obviously bring out a lot of people's opinions on what wrestling should be. And from this, sexualized moves and action would become a part of Joey Ryan's wrestling repertoire. He would do these moves to male wrestlers, women wrestlers, fans in attendance, retired legends of wrestling. Joey Ryan's new style of wrestling essentially saw him become one of the most polarizing figures in wrestling, with many people involved in wrestling seeing him as a joke, particularly Jim Cornette, whom Joey engaged in a very public feud with for many years, resulting in many long and jarring Twitter feuds between the two. Joey Ryan's wrestling style really did cause a huge divide in wrestling fans, with fans arguing that this is what wrestling shouldn't be, and other fans arguing that wrestling really can be anything. But in the end, the people who defended his wrestling style and gimmick would come to regret it, myself included. And once again, a quick content warning as we're about to discuss themes such as sexual abuse and assault. In June of 2020, Joey Ryan was named in the Speaking Out movement, a movement dedicated to exposing abusers, offenders, and all-round wrong-uns in the wrestling industry. And at least 17 women would speak out about Joey Ryan, accusing him of sexual assault and harassment. These claims by the women were backed up by other wrestlers such as Joey Janela and Ryan Nemeth, both whom have worked with him, with Ryan Nemeth having lived with the guy. Joey Ryan posted a lengthy statement on Twitter denying any wrongdoing, and would also post an over hour-long video to his YouTube channel, once again defending himself from every allegation. But by this point, his contract with Impact had been terminated, his promotion was shut down, and his wrestling career was rightfully put to a halt. And other than a failed return in March of 2021, Joey Ryan has not been involved in wrestling whatsoever, and he probably never will be. Patrick Clark was a contestant on the 2015 edition of WWE Tough Enough, a reality game show where the winner earned a WWE contract. Patrick was a standout performer on the show. He was an actual wrestler beforehand and was clearly ahead of all his opponents in any wrestling aspect of the competition. He was the clear winner of the show, but was shockingly eliminated early on in the show to the shock of many, with the elimination being seen as very undeserved. Luckily though, Patrick was still picked up by the WWE, being signed to a developmental contract, and after a few house show matches and jobber appearances on TV, Patrick Clark would debut in WWE NXT as the Velveteen Dream, a flamboyant, Prince-inspired character, with his first major feud being against Aleister Black, a feud in which Dream was obsessed with getting Aleister Black to say his name, and this culminated with a fantastic match at NXT TakeOver War Games 2017, which Aleister Black won. After the match though, Black got on the mic and said Dream's name as a sign of respect, and from here, Velveteen Dream had become a fan favourite. His in-ring work was solid, he was charismatic, and many thought he was destined to be a big star in the WWE. He was still young and had heaps of potential. He won the NXT North American title in 2019, his first title in the WWE. He lost it 7 months later, but he was still destined for greatness. After this though, he was injured and would return in February 2020 to the excitement of many fans, but that excitement would fade away after not too long. In April 2020, a post was made on the Squared Circle subreddit accusing Velveteen Dream of sending lewd photos to underage boys on Instagram. In the allegations included screenshots of what appeared to be a naked man and a voice note that was clearly from Velveteen Dream asking the boy what school he went to. The post was quickly removed from the subreddit, and Twitter and the internet went into absolute flames as this was completely out of nowhere, with many Velveteen Dream fans being very disappointed by this. Further allegations would come out about Velveteen Dream during Speaking Out in June 2020, with him being accused of grooming. Velveteen Dream though was still on TV though, but nobody could really watch him wrestle the same anymore. And the few fans in attendance who would have been giving him support weren't there because it was COVID era and fans weren't allowed to attend any of the shows. In fact, during the Thunderdome era, there were people using their webcams to write messages advocating for Dream to be fired. Whatever Dream was doing on TV, the fans weren't supporting him, and his usage on TV was very inconsistent, with him disappearing from TV for weeks at a time randomly. In May of 2021, Dream was released from the WWE after being inactive for 5 months. After being released, Dream would finally respond to all the allegations and denied them, stating not wanting to hurt his wrestling character and break kayfabe as the reason why he took so long to respond. Velveteen Dream has not wrestled since his WWE release, and has also since gotten himself into a strange online feud with EC3, with EC3 accusing Velveteen Dream of setting his phone camera up in bathrooms in order to film people urinating. Let's move on from Velveteen Dream, shall we? On June 22nd, 2014, wrestler Michael Elgin became the Ring of Honor World Champion, beating Adam Cole for the title at Best in the World. It was perhaps the biggest championship win of Elgin's entire career and a 10-year career up until that point. And up until that point, Elgin had been a stalwart of the independent scene, having wrestled and had been very successful in many companies, including but not limited to CZW, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, IWA Mid-South, and he also wrestled for other companies and other countries such as DDT in Japan. Elgin would hold the Ring of Honor title until September of that year, losing it to Jay Briscoe, but even though he lost it, Michael Elgin was now in the best years of his career, and after an already solid 10+ year career, Elgin was hitting the glory years now. He was one of the best unsigned wrestlers out there, and through Ring of Honor's working relationship with New Japan, Elgin would begin working there too, and start getting really popular in New Japan Pro Wrestling, with it being reported in February 2016 that he had officially signed for the company for 2 years. At Invasion Attack in April 2016, Elgin won his first title in New Japan when he, Tanahashi, and Yoshitatsu won the never openweight 6-man tag titles, defeating the Elite. They would lose the titles back to the Elite less than a month later, but soon after that, Elgin would defeat Kenny Omega to win the IWGP Intercontinental title, his first singles title win in New Japan and perhaps one of the biggest wins of his career. He lost the title 3 months later and would have various title shots and programs in the company for the next year. At the end of 2017, Elgin began teaming with Jeff Cobb in the Global Tag League, but behind the scenes, a lot was going on. In December 2017, a woman accused one of Michael Elgin's trainees of sexually assaulting her, with the woman sharing multiple screenshots of DMs between herself and Elgin, accusing him of mishandling the allegations and ignoring them, doing nothing about it. Screenshots were also released showing him making disparaging remarks about his tag team partner Jeff Cobb. Following these allegations, Elgin was pulled from many indie dates, and while New Japan kept him around and kept him teaming with Jeff Cobb, that must have been very awkward. His run in New Japan was just really awkward. He would win the never openweight title in 2018 to the shock of many fans, but at this point, no one really wanted to see him in New Japan, and in 2019, he was let go of the company. He was signed by Impact though that same year, which was seen as a really weird move by them. He didn't really do much in Impact, and during the Speaking Out movement in 2020, the allegations against Michael Elgin would resurface, as well as new allegations of him sending explicit photos to a woman were surfacing too. He was suspended indefinitely and eventually fired by Impact as a result. But once again, in 2022, after 2 years of inactivity, a company randomly decided to sign Michael Elgin again, with Elgin making appearances for Pro Wrestling Noah and winning the GHC tag titles. However, 2 months later, he was stripped of the title and removed from future Noah shows due to his run-ins with the Japanese law. The crimes he committed, you ask? Shoplifting protein powder. Chazen Rance began wrestling in 1999 across the Florida independent scene and would do so for many years, even making appearances for the Orlando-based TNA on episodes of Impact as a jobber in the early to mid-2000s. However, Rance never really made it far in his wrestling career. He never really got his big break, and he mainly just wrestled in the Florida scene. As I said before, he was an okay wrestler, but again, he never really had a big break and would never really make any headlines. That was until 2010. When Chazen Rance was arrested in 2010, accused of having sexual relations with a teenager. In 2011, he was charged with lewd behavior as well as battery and sex with a 12 to 15-year-old, and in 2014, he was officially added to the sex offender registry. I cannot stress enough that he was charged and found guilty of this. So yeah, within 30 seconds of talking about Chazen Rance, that should be the end of this story, right? No. Because following his arrest, he would take a whole 7 months out of wrestling, according to Cage Match, and then just simply came back. And for some reason, people were just fine with it. He was actively wrestling during his court case, and looking at his Cage Match, he wasn't going longer than a month without wrestling. As quick as he was arrested, found guilty and charged, he was even quicker at returning to wrestling and keeping on going like nothing had ever happened. And soon after, he would also open the Team Vision Dojo, a wrestling training school in Orlando, Florida. That's right, a wrestling training school being headed by a literal sex offender. Many popular wrestlers to this day continue to shamelessly use the Team Vision facility, despite it being a very well-known secret who owns it. As well as this, the Team Vision Dojo continues to accept minors to train at the school with Rance, and Rance himself is one half of the tag team champions for the school's promotion, with the other half being a 16-year-old girl. Just weird. Team Vision released the following statement to Bodyslam.net when questioned on this. Hello, Chazen Rance was deemed guilty in the court of law in 2011 for actions that took place in 2008. During his time on probation, Chazen was in therapy, not allowed to interact with minors, and had to submit to drug testing. Chazen completed everything that was required by law and went back to training minors again, showing full knowledge of his past with parents. Chazen continues to be one of the best trainers in professional wrestling around, and there's no denying that. While the actions of the past look very bad, the future looks bright for all those that Chazen continues to help. Thank you for any concerns. Everyone at Team Vision Dojo is doing great and have many big projects continuing and others in the work. If you would like to contact Chazen regarding anything else or other false accusations that this website has promoted in the past that was debunked, feel free to contact him at chazen@gmail.com. Why Chazen was still allowed to continue to wrestle is absolutely beyond me, and I'm sure this video might elicit some sort of response from him, so that will be interesting to see if that does take place. But as I say, it is an absolute disgrace that this guy is still able to wrestle. Travis Banks is a Kiwi professional wrestler who debuted in 2009. Banks spent the first few years of his wrestling career wrestling across New Zealand promotions, mainly New Zealand Wide Pro Wrestling and Impact Pro Wrestling. In 2012, Travis would get a big opportunity as he was booked to wrestle in Japan for 0-1, and this would change the tide for his wrestling career as he would begin getting booked in America. However, he would never debut for anywhere major in America before moving back to New Zealand. In 2016 though, Travis, presumably seeking something new in his wrestling career, moved to the United Kingdom, and this was the career reinvention that Travis really needed. Banks would wrestle for numerous promotions for the next few years in the UK, most notably ICW, Southside, Progress, RevPro, TNT, and of course, What Culture Pro Wrestling / Defiant Wrestling, which is the promotion that I found out about Travis Banks through. And while I never became one, Travis Banks had many fans in the British scene and was one of the bigger names in the BritRes community, holding titles in many promotions and often being the guy that promotions trusted to work with foreign talent. In 2018, he was in the prime of his career. He was the holder of the Progress World title and the Defiant Internet title at the same time, and after being a stalwart of the UK indie scene, he was given his big break as he was signed by the WWE to be on their NXT UK brand. Travis got some decent exposure from being in the WWE, occasionally being flown to the US to do NXT house shows, and he even competed for the Cruiserweight title at World Collide 2020. But it was also in 2020 that Banks' time in WWE and on the British wrestling scene would come to a screeching halt. During the Speaking Out movement in June 2020, British wrestler Millie McKenzie came forward accusing Travis Banks of emotionally abusing her, whilst they were in a secret relationship while she was just 17, providing screenshots showing some disturbing messages from Travis. Travis Banks responded with the following: "Millie was a trainee of mine at Fight Club Pro. She was also a close personal friend. We would be at shows together, attend the same social events, travel together, and hang out at the wrestler's house where I was living. It was through this friendship a consensual relationship was formed." The relationship broke down between both parties and it ended. After it ended, we agreed to talk it out. We apologized to each other for any individual actions behind the relationship breakdown. After seeing these comments, I can only repeat my apology. I am truly sorry for any pain caused by the relationship. Travis was released from the WWE shortly thereafter, and this is another moment where this should be the end of our story, but it isn't. Travis Banks still wrestles. For the last year or so, he's been hiding in the underground scene in Mexico, wrestling for underground promotions in there, wrestling the likes of Marty Scurll and Alberto Del Rio. I'm seeing a pattern there. And hey, speaking of Alberto Del Rio, Alberto Del Rio debuted on the WWE SmackDown brand in 2010. He was 10 years deep into his career and had wrestled for AAA, CMLL, and had a short run in WWE's developmental territory, Florida Championship Wrestling. Alberto Del Rio was pushed heavily, very quickly into his WWE career, with him beating Rey Mysterio in his first feud in the company and having a world title match at TLC 2010. Only 6 months after his debut. And while he was unsuccessful in winning that match, he would be successful in winning the 2011 40-man Royal Rumble match, guaranteeing him a title shot at WrestleMania. One that he would unfortunately lose, but it seems that WWE wasn't done pushing him, as he would win that year's Raw Money in the Bank briefcase, which he would successfully and infamously cash in on CM Punk to win the WWE title at that year's SummerSlam. That summer was obviously very turbulent for the WWE title scene, and nobody really wanted to see Alberto as champion, but his push would continue for the next few years with a couple of reigns of the World Heavyweight Championship in the next couple years, until 2014, when out of nowhere, Del Rio was released from his WWE contract for unprofessional conduct. Allegedly, Del Rio had slapped a worker who made a racist joke to him. Del Rio would return to the WWE a year later, winning the US title on his first match back, and during this run, Del Rio would get into a relationship with fellow WWE wrestler Paige, and this is where everything went off the rails. The two got together in May 2016 and were engaged by October of that same year. But also by that point, Del Rio was out of the WWE again and had nuclear heat with the company, as well as Paige's family, who did not support her being engaged to him, and it all came to a head after an incident between the two at an airport in 2017. Reports came out that the two had a domestic dispute and an investigation was ongoing, stemming from a domestic violence battery incident at Orlando Airport, and audio of the incident was leaked. In said audio, you can hear Del Rio threatening to call the police on Paige, and Paige telling him to leave her the fuck alone and get out of her life. The investigation was eventually concluded with no charges being brought about, and the couple split up that same year. Now gone from the WWE, Del Rio has not managed to stay out of trouble. In 2020, Del Rio was arrested after allegedly battering and sexually assaulting his girlfriend, and in October of that same year, he was formally charged with aggravated kidnapping and sexual assault. The trial kept on getting delayed and delayed until December 2021, when the charges were all eventually dropped. Nowadays, Del Rio mainly wrestles in Mexico, having been blackballed from every major promotion in America, wrestling with his friends and people I mentioned before, Travis Banks and Marty Scurll, the latter being a name for another video to discuss. And he will never ever return to the WWE, despite how many times he has tried to convince us that he is. Lars Sullivan was signed to the WWE in 2014 as a Performance Center recruit, and after 3 years of training would debut on the WWE NXT brand in 2017. He started to receive a monster push immediately, often winning in handicap matches, and was beating some of NXT's biggest stars very quickly into his WWE career. Most notably, at NXT TakeOver New Orleans 2018, he took part in the North American title ladder match won by Adam Cole, a match that was given 5 stars by Meltzer, if you care about that stuff, meaning Lars Sullivan and Jack Swagger have more 5-star matches than Kurt Angle. It's just wrong, isn't it? It's just wrong. He would wrestle his final NXT match challenging Aleister Black for the world title at June 2018's TakeOver Chicago event, suffering his first pinfall loss in the company, and in November of that year, vignettes would begin airing teasing his main roster debut. He was set to make his debut in January and was apparently being set up to face John Cena at that year's WrestleMania. However, his main roster debut had to be delayed due to him having a panic attack backstage. He would finally make his debut in April, and his main roster run and monster push would finally begin, but it would also start crashing and burning before it even got really started, as in May 2020, Lars Sullivan's old posts on bodybuilding.com were exposed, many of which were labeled as racist, sexist and homophobic, and many posts were targeted at WWE employees, some that were still employed by the company and that he was working with, including Stephanie McMahon. Lars Sullivan had nuclear heat backstage following this and had to apologise to the locker room for these posts, but that wasn't stopping WWE from continuing their push with him, as they kept pushing him until he got injured, leaving him out of action for about a year and a half. It's all going from bad to worse for Lars Sullivan. He returned in October 2020 for 2 matches, but 3 months later it was reported that he had quietly been released from the company. While he was injured though, it was found out that he had starred in a gay pornography, despite the fact that he had had homophobic past comments in the past, and also at the end of his WWE career, he was exposed for sending inappropriate DMs to a woman. Yeah, the guy did a lot, before and during his WWE career. He was exposed for a... Gentleman Jack Gallagher was first introduced to WWE audiences in 2016, when he was part of the Cruiserweight Classic. He defeated Fabian Aichner in the first round, but was knocked out in the second round by Akira Tozawa. However, Gallagher would get signed by the WWE and would begin making appearances for 205 Live on Monday Night Raw as part of the new revamped Cruiserweight division. He would compete in the Royal Rumble in January, he would challenge for the Cruiserweight title at Fastlane, and would challenge for the WWE United Kingdom Championship too. For the next few years though, Jack Gallagher would really tread water. He never really became anything in the Cruiserweight division or just in WWE in general. He would often lose matches, and he was mainly just known as the British guy in the Cruiserweight division who wasn't Neville. For the next couple of years, he would get into feuds with the likes of Brian Kendrick, Drew Gulak, and even Drake Maverick, And following a losing streak in 2019, Jack Gallagher headbutted Drake Maverick after he had just lost to Angel Garza, continuing that losing streak and turning heel in the process and using it to take some time away from TV. And when he returned in February 2020, he was sporting an entirely new look, with numerous tattoos on him, and just wasn't looking like the male Mary Poppins that he was before. He was no longer just a generic British stereotype. And it looked as though, hey, maybe this was the start of something new for Jack Gallagher. Maybe this is a new era for Jack Gallagher. But this new era for Jack Gallagher wouldn't last very long. On the 19th of June 2020, a woman came out accusing Jack Gallagher of sexually assaulting her at a New Year's Eve party in 2014 as part of the Speaking Out movement. Jack Gallagher was released from the WWE on the same day. On the 5th of October of that same year, Gallagher would break his silence on the allegations. He stated that he did not remember the incident taking place, but he wished to take responsibility and he apologized for what he had done. Jack Gallagher has not wrestled since his WWE release. However, he was signed by Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship this year and has had one fight which he won, with him having another fight in December. But it looks as though he'll never be involved in wrestling ever again. Ted DiBiase Jr., the son of Ted DiBiase, debuted for the WWE in 2008, winning the tag titles in his first match with Cody Rhodes. The two would soon after join up with Randy Orton to form Legacy, a trio made up of second and third generation wrestlers, and Legacy was very successful as a trio. Rhodes and DiBiase won the World Tag Team Championships 2 times while the trio were together, and Randy Orton won the WWE title 3 times whilst in the group. In 2010 though, the group would split up, culminating in a triple threat match at WrestleMania 26 that was won by Randy Orton. And unfortunately for Ted DiBiase Jr. from here, he wouldn't really do much. Randy Orton would continue as a main eventer well into the modern day, and Cody Rhodes would begin his ascension as a single star, and we all know everything he has done since then, and that has culminated in him being one of the biggest stars in wrestling today. Ted DiBiase Jr. though, he started the DiBiase posse. That's the levels between the three of them. WWE tried to recapture the magic of his dad by giving DiBiase Jr. the $1 Million Championship, Maurice as his on-screen girlfriend, and even brought back Virgil. But just none of it worked. And Ted DiBiase Jr. never really amounted to anything following the split of Legacy. On August 26, 2013, DiBiase announced that due to suffering anxiety and depression, that he wouldn't be renewing his WWE contract, and he would be gone from the company soon after. DiBiase would wrestle 3 more matches on 2013, and another 2 in 2016 and 2017 respectively, before calling it a day for his wrestling career. And it would all go quiet as Ted DiBiase Jr.'s name would fizzle away. Until May of 2022. But first, we have to go back to February 2020, where the Office of the Mississippi State Auditor arrested 6 people that it accused of mishandling federal funds dispersed by the Mississippi Department of Human Services. Please follow with me here. These arrests would kick off a major government fraud scandal, which when we fast forward to May of 2022, the Auditor's Office have released a report identifying $94 million in questionable spending, with it being funneled through 2 non-profit organizations, and the investigation found that this money was made available to numerous notable people, including football player Brett Favre and the DiBiase family, whom were sued. They were sought to recover $20 million in money that was squandered from the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families anti-poverty program. Essentially, because I know this is very tough to follow, the DiBiase family received money fraudulently through non-profit organizations that were meant to be used to benefit needy Mississippians. But they weren't. They were just given to the DiBiase family. In September 2022, John Davis, who was the director of the Mississippi Department of Human Services, was sentenced to 90 years in prison for 5 counts of conspiracy and 13 counts of defrauding the government. Bill DeMott made his first major wrestling appearances for WCW. He enjoyed a stint in WCW from 1995 all the way until WWE's buyout of the company in 2001, being a two-time WCW United States Heavyweight Champion. He would then wrestle for the WWE from 2001 until 2007, mainly being used as a jobber and a lower card guy, where he would go under many different names. Hugh Morris, General Huge Erection, and of course what we mainly know him as, Bill DeMott. Bill DeMott left the WWE in 2007 and would begin working the indies and would open his own wrestling school that he ran from 2009 until 2010. And it seemed like being a trainer was Bill DeMott's calling now, because in 2011 he returned to the WWE as a trainer, thus ending his in-ring career. He was the head trainer for that year's Tough Enough, and he would become the head trainer for FCW, a position that he would retain when FCW transitioned into NXT, and he would continue in this role into 2013 when the WWE Performance Center was opened. But in 2015, his career as a trainer would also end, because in March 2015, a load of allegations against Bill DeMott came to the limelight from several former Deep South Wrestling, FCW, and NXT trainees. These allegations had actually all came out between 2012 and 2015, with WWE only responding to some of them at the time and stating they found no wrongdoing. Among the names accusing Bill DeMott of mistreatment were Eva Lise, Hannibal, Kurt Hawkins, Luchasaurus, EC3, Ryan Nemeth, Simon Dean, and even Kenny Omega, amongst other names. DeMott was accused of sexual harassment, using racist and homophobic slurs, letting trainees train while naked, making trainees do dangerous drills, and bullying his trainees. This resulted in the hashtag FireBillDeMott trending on Twitter, and sure enough, on March 6, 2015, Bill DeMott would respond to the allegations. He outright denied all the allegations, but also announced his resignation, citing that he didn't want to damage the reputation of WWE. Since his resignation, he has not been involved in wrestling. So yeah, that wraps it up. In 2016, Brian Kendrick returned to the WWE when he competed in their Cruiserweight Classic. Before this, he had already had 2 stints with the WWE, as well as runs in Ring of Honor and TNA. Though he didn't win the tournament, he would win the Cruiserweight title that same year, and it seemed as though Brian Kendrick had caught a third wind in the WWE. However, this Cruiserweight title run was short-lived and didn't last long, and from here, he just became another lower card Cruiserweight guy. He would do this for a few years, but by 2020, his wrestling career had slowed down, and he had become a backstage producer and trainer in the WWE. It seemed as though his wrestling career was pretty much done. Until in 2022, when Brian Kendrick started getting involved in NXT and got into a feud with Haaland. No, not Erling, I'm talking about Parker Boudreaux. Brian Kendrick's in-ring return was announced, and he was set to be facing Haaland on January 25th, 2022. However, the match never took place, as it was reported that Brian Kendrick had asked for his release from the company, and 6 days later, the release was granted on February 1st, and now nobody knew what Kendrick was going to do next. Until a few hours later, when on the very same day he was released, he was announced to be facing Jon Moxley on AEW Dynamite on February 2nd, the very next day. It was a crazy turn of events, and everything happened very fast, and what would happen next would happen even faster. On February 2nd, the date he was set to appear on AEW Dynamite, old statements from Brian Kendrick resurfaced, video and text interviews where he states his belief in numerous conspiracy theories began to spread over social media, with him stating his belief in the Holocaust death numbers being faked and exaggerated, the Sandy Hook shooting being faked, 9/11 being faked, and the killing of Osama bin Laden never happening. As a result of this, his AEW Dynamite appearance was cancelled, with Tony Khan stating on Twitter, "We've been made aware of abhorrent and offensive comments made in the past by Brian Kendrick. There's no room in AEW for the views expressed by Brian. We think it's best for all that Brian be pulled from tonight's card as we gather more info. We'll announce a replacement bout ASAP." Brian Kendrick would later post his own statement on Twitter saying the following, I spread the most vile comments without thinking of the damage it would cause. I will live with this regret for the rest of my life. I am truly sorry for the pain I have caused. As well as, I apologize for all the hurt and embarrassment I have caused with my words. These are not beliefs and were never beliefs of mine, and I crossed the line. All of this happened in the space of 24 hours. Brian Kendrick has not been involved in wrestling since, other than this past Survivor Series where he produced Ronda Rousey vs Shotzi, as he was specifically requested by Ronda. In 2016, Jake Atlas made his wrestling debut, and for the next couple of years he would make his mark on the independent scene, wrestling for the likes of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, Beyond Wrestling, Warrior Wrestling, PWG, GCW, and Ring of Honor. On October 23, 2019, Jake Atlas would sign with the WWE for the NXT brand. It was his big break. However, I think it's fair to say that his WWE run was very uneventful. Jake mainly wrestled in the Cruiserweight division and on 205 Live, with his biggest match being against Santos Escobar for the Cruiserweight title, which he lost. And on August 6, 2021, after just under 2 years in the WWE, Jake Atlas was released from his contract as part of a round of budget cut releases. Following his WWE release, he'd wrestled for GCW and Ring of Honor in September 2021, but shortly after, he announced his retirement from wrestling. But nobody retires in wrestling, and 3 months later, Jake Atlas was back. He appeared on AEW Dark in December, coming out of retirement and defeating Serpentico, and then on the January 7th edition of AEW Rampage, Jake Atlas would face Adam Cole in a match. He would lose the match, but he was announced as being all elite after the show. Jake Atlas was back, and in a big way. Unfortunately for him though, he got injured in this match, suffering a knee injury that would leave him out for most of a year. And even more unfortunately was that only a few months into his injury, controversy would call. As on May 3rd, 2022, Jake Atlas was arrested after his boyfriend called the police on him. Atlas had reportedly scratched his boyfriend and tore his tank top during an argument over a sexual encounter. Jake Atlas was charged with misdemeanor domestic battery, and Jake Atlas, in a tweet that no longer exists, apologized for his actions and said that he was under the influence when it happened, and says though that does not excuse his behavior, he has been attending an alcohol abuse treatment program for the past 7 years, and he intends to continue. The charges were later dropped, but a video of the arrest was released showing the footage from the police's POV, showing Jake Atlas pull the I'm famous card, call his boyfriend a nobody, a bitch ass, and said that he was bad at sex. It's an uncomfortable video. Jake Atlas' contract finished with AEW, who had no intention to re-sign him in October 2022, and he has not been involved in wrestling since. Jimmy Havoc made his wrestling debut in 2004. He had trained at NWUK Hammerlock alongside other trainees like Zack Sabre Jr. and Fergal Devitt. You might have heard of them. Jimmy Havoc very quickly established himself as a deathmatch wrestler, and he quickly became one of the top deathmatch wrestlers in Europe, wrestling for promotions such as IPW UK, WXW, and he also competed in CZW's European Tournaments of Death in 2010 and 2012, and as well in 2012, he would debut for ICW and Progress Wrestling in the UK, two of the biggest promotions in the UK, and would spend the next few years as one of the top wrestlers in British wrestling, eventually appearing for the likes of Defiant Wrestling and making his way to America to appear for Impact Wrestling. Jimmy Havoc's career just kept on going up. In 2017, he started making appearances for the revived MLW, making appearances for them until 2019, and 2019 was perhaps the biggest year of his career as he was announced as one of the first AEW signings, and he would be debuting at AEW's debut show Double or Nothing 2019, and he appeared in the Casino Battle Royal, making it to the Final Four. And at that year's All Out pay-per-view, he scored a big win over Darby Allin and Joey Janela in the Cracker Barrel Brawl match. Following this though, Jimmy Havoc would mainly work on Dark and only occasionally work on Dynamite. He was also getting into fights at restaurants against Excalibur and losing. On the 15th of April 2020, Jimmy Havoc and Kip Sabian would start teaming up and calling themselves the Superbad Squad. They had their biggest match when they challenged Omega and Page for the tag titles on the June 3rd Dynamite in a losing effort. And it was also that same month when Jimmy Havoc's career would change forever and also end. Jimmy Havoc was accused of rape, abusive behavior, and assault in June 2020 Speaking Out movement. Following this, AEW announced on social media that they would be sending Jimmy Havoc to attend counseling and rehabilitation, stating the following: "We wish Jimmy Havoc all the best as he receives treatment and counseling in an effort to overcome the mental health and substance abuse challenges in his life. We are aware of various reports related to Jimmy. We are evaluating his status with our company and will address it when he has successfully completed his rehabilitation." Jimmy Havoc was released from AEW in August of that year. He has not been involved in wrestling since, has never responded to any of the allegations, and if this image is anything to go by, he looks completely different. That is it for the AEW Degenerates. Be sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what video you want to see next. And I'm also going to quickly address, because I know I'm going to get so many comments about it, I know there are people that I left out on this. I know, okay? But that's it from me. I'll see you all soon. Goodbye, and keep on rolling.